So, welcome. Really, really good to see so many people here. Thank you very much for travelling to York for the annual lecture. For those of you who don't know me, and I think probably most of us have been together all day, so I'm Tessa Harrison, I'm the chair of the association and also director of Students and Education at King's College London. It gives me really great pleasure to introduce you to our annual lecture. A couple of things I want to say beforehand. I don't think we're expecting a fire again. That looks like the door. So I'm assuming somebody will come and help us out when we get to that point, if we get to that point. So I need to say thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the Good Governance Institute, who are sponsoring the annual lecture. I'd also like to say thank you to Electric Paper, who've been sponsoring the development day today. So thank you to both of them. What I would like to do now is to move us into the bit of the evening when we award the postgraduate certificate. It's our graduation event. Just say a little bit about the PG Cert for those of you who may not be entirely familiar. The PG Cert we now offer in partnership with Nottingham Trent University as our validating university. PG Cert is obviously AUA's flagship academic programme. Participants combine working with studying and study a wide range of topics around management and leadership issues in higher education. It's a pretty tough call, actually, for people. They are working invariably full-time and doing the studying at the same time. So to achieve a PG Cert is a really significant achievement. And we are, as an association, incredibly proud of our graduates. So it gives me great pleasure to ask Kim White, the School Executive Manager of the University of the West of Scotland, to come up and receive her certificate. You will see also that there are a number of other colleagues graduating this autumn. I'm not actually going to read out all of their names, but I will leave them there for a little while just to make sure that you see who they all are. And I've got another slide of names as well. So we've had a really bumper crop this year. Okay, so congratulations to all of our graduates. Now, I've just got to do a bit of IT, so just bear with me.
Whoa.
Did it. Right. So now onto the annual lecture itself. We are really, really honoured to welcome Professor Sir Ian Diamond. Ian is the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Aberdeen. In his previous career, he's been Chief Executive of the ESRC, RC UK Executive Group, and Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Southampton. For the last few years, and I suspect this is where most of us have come to know about Ian, he's been chairing the UUK Group on Efficiency, leading an impressive, quite interesting programme of initiatives across higher education institutions aimed at finding ways of making our institutions more efficient. So we are really lucky, particularly after the day that we've had and the sessions that we've been part of, to hear Ian speak this evening. So, Ian.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, I'm hugely privileged to be invited to give this lecture. I first became aware of the AUA, I think, in 2002, when you invited the University of Southampton to host your conference. And my then colleague, John Lowrice, probably known to some of this parish, gave a lecture which he described to me as his vision for professionalising the administration. That we now normally use the word professional services as the agglomerative word for all of you, perhaps points to a recognition, if somewhat belated, of the contribution that you all make to the sector. And what a sector it is that we have. Look, I'm just going to put this slide up. It's an unbelievable sector, and all this slide does is give a few tastes of the economic value of higher education in the UK, a £73 billion, if I may use the word, industry, which contributes fully 2.8% of UK GDP. And that's unbelievable if you think about it. And it's, of course, extremely efficient, as I will describe to you later. And it is efficient because in the right place we have partnership. And in this lecture I'm going to be 3 key words: partnership, efficiency and effectiveness. And I'll run through them as I move through. But when I look at a slide like this with so much economic value, we also need to remember that higher education also drives innovation, promotes social inclusion, advances culture, and critically transforms lives. And when I hear anecdotes, as we do all the time, there's too many graduates. We don't need graduates, we'll just have a few apprentices, that's all we need. I point to all the evidence that says that a future labour force of successful countries, the sort that we want from all the countries that constitute the United Kingdom, will require higher level skills, not less. And if I just may, as an aside, say, too often recently in the last year or so, we've been suggested that there's a choice, a binary choice between further education and higher education. I just think that's complete madness. I believe what we need in our country is more people with more skills and fewer people with no skills. What we need is more further education and more higher education. But let me just return, if I may, to the benefits of higher education. I've highlighted in many ways through this slide the macro benefits to the state. There are, of course, benefits to individuals as well. As Rick Rylance, the Chief Executive of the Arts and Humanities Research Council, pointed out to me recently, that graduates are on average much less likely to get murdered than non-graduates. So that's something for those of you who are graduates to take away this evening. But they will, of course, on average be richer, more likely to be employed. If they lose their job, more likely to regain a job. Healthier and more engaged with civil society. In short, more active citizens. And I would have this time to note the great changes that you, as professional services people, as administrators and universities, have really placed in the curricula, and critically I think also the co-curricula, to bring more structure in helping students to grow as active citizens. So, the punchline so far is that higher education is unbelievably valuable for a 21st century nation, and that it is in every way a partnership between the state and the individual. Now, some colleagues may have been on one of those Leadership Foundation for Higher Education courses on the Entrepreneurial University, and it's a great course, I recommend it. And on the programme a couple of years ago, participants were asked, if your university was a retail organisation, which retail organisation would you like it to be? I thought that was rather fun, so I tried it out on my own colleagues. And the overwhelming response at Aberdeen was John Lewis. And the reason was there was a commitment at John Lewis for being broad-based and truly excellent. But actually, and look, I don't have a problem with that, but when one looks at the underlying success of that company, something else comes out. And that what drives success are partnerships with its staff and with its customers. And that, in my view, is no different for universities or indeed university sectors. And what I'm going to do is to look at partnership through a number of lenses in order to show that that's how we become more efficient. So let me start at the university level, and it's here where most of you will focus your energies. I should say that I'm not new to the view that partnership is critical. I spoke to the UUK conference in 2007 on collaboration, not competition, and that is something that I think is even more important now for higher education right across the UK. But partnership is actually central to every function of a university, and no more so than in the relationship, I would argue, between administrators and academics. And I suspect that the two universities in which I've spent much of my career are no different to others, in that there's sometimes a tension between academics and administrators. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate because, as I say to anyone who raises that tension, no one could live without the other. Together we need to be partners, and together we can drive forward higher education. And it's encapsulated no more so than in the partnerships that are needed to drive forward what is now euphemistically called the learner journey. I don't know if I like it. I find myself saying it in about 5 times a day. I'm not sure I like it, but anyway, let's talk about the learner journey briefly, because it is only the way in which academics and administrators work together to make people aware of the university, to advise them when they apply to university, and then to welcome them when they come to university, and then to help them through their careers, that enables us together to have the kind of education which is so good in the United Kingdom. Mark Smith, the Vice-Chancellor of Lancaster University, has reminded us recently that partnerships like this are not new, and partnerships with students are not new. He reminded me that they're a regular feature of medieval universities. When I noticed that, I went back and looked at Aberdeen, and I can tell you that in the 19th century, students at Aberdeen, in a partnership with staff, only paid for their lecture if they thought it was satisfactory. Now that's, to me, that's a new way of looking at the NSS. But the true value of the partnership with our students, so we've got the partnership between academics and administrators, we then need to have the partnership with our students, comes in the increasing use in the learner journey of student-led teaching, flexibility in course choice, and changing pedagogies. All can only work with transparency and partnerships. Look, I could go on about this for a lecture on its own, and I don't have enough time, but I just would say that when we move to research, nothing changes. The more that we co-produce research with our stakeholders, the potential beneficiaries, the more that we work to identify the major problems in partnerships and teams, the better. But partnerships, fine, but what is it that makes a really good university? We need autonomous, critically autonomous, transparent institutions who partner with all their stakeholders in order to be financially sustainable. And in the context of the fiscal austerity that has gripped the UK for the last few years, and is likely to remain, I would suggest, for the next few years, it is important to understand how universities are funded and how, in partnership, we can work on a future agenda to overcome some of the challenges that fiscal austerity brings to us. So, in the past few years, when we think about the funding of universities, particularly in England, the funding has often been equated with an agenda around fees. I didn't know how to spell income contingent loans 5 years ago. I now have a somewhat anorak obsession with RAB charges. And just in case you thought I wouldn't, I am going to come back to RAB charges and talk about them a little later. But I want to move away from it partly and argue that when we, instead of just concentrating on higher education funding, let us think about higher education systems. And I'm really privileged at the moment to be charged by the Welsh Government with leading a review of higher education funding in Wales. I would love to be able to tell you what the results are, but we're just in the final processes of putting them together. But what I would like to tell you about are the principles that we have put together in order to drive our thinking as a review panel. And what the panel has said, and I won't spend too much time on that slide because it's much of what I've said already, but it simply says it's really important to have higher education, but to have a system of higher education which works in partnership with all its stakeholders, with the state, with the individual, and with the system, and which recognizes the diversity of mission of different institutions, all of which need to be strong, which funds research in order to be internationally competitive and recognizes the critical importance of the dual support system, and which respects autonomy. A system of funding higher education has also to be progressive, to support widening participation to be attractive to those from most disadvantaged backgrounds. We believe that when you think about the costs of higher education, you need to think about maintenance as well as fees. It needs a holistic approach to costs. In Wales, it's incredibly important also to recognise the need to deliver higher education in the Welsh medium. We need support for part-time and for full-time. We need support for undergraduate and for postgraduate. They need to be equally privileged. And we need to recognise that it costs more to teach veterinary students than it does to teach sociology students. And we need a system which is sustainable. Now look, put that together. It's not hard, is it? A simple problem that we are faced with. And I think it's important to say that if we're going to fund higher education, we actually need to have a system which recognises all those factors. So let me just say a few words, because the easy thing to say is, look, this is a time of unprecedented change in higher education funding, a time when people say, it's never been harder than this. I have to tell you, I lead a university which has been around for 520 years, and in 1715, one of my predecessors got on the wrong side of a national rebellion. That's a problem. The sorts of things we're faced with now are more challenges. But when we talk about unprecedented change, I think it's worth remembering that we have had a fair amount of stability across the United Kingdom, particularly with regard to research. We may recognise that there has been a real terms reduction in research funding, but the dual support system, which is so critical, I think, to the success of UK higher education research, has been committed to by successive governments. I don't see any change in that at the moment, and I think it's important that we continue that way. So that has stayed. However, when we look at teaching, we have had increasing changes, and I'll come to talk about them in just a second. And we've had real changes in the way that capital is funded. And if we look across the UK as a whole, what we see is in the period between 2008 and 2014, that histogram goes up. It goes up because there has been more funding in the system. Yet that is the system for the UK. If I showed it to you for Scotland, for Wales, it looks very different. And the other important thing to note is that the purple patch gets much bigger, and that is tuition fees and education contracts. In other words, we have had in England a major change away towards, I'm not saying anything you don't know, the payment by the individual. But at the same time, in England in particular, the amount of money in universities has gone up. What that's meant is that there's a major change in the proportion of funding which has come from the state directly to universities. So that if you look at this slide, what this shows is that in England and indeed in Wales here, major reductions in funding, in funding body grants because the money is coming directly from tuition fee income. Whereas in Scotland, the funding body continues to be an incredibly important supporter of higher education directly. And I think that's important. And indeed, it's also, I think, important to recognise that this divergence has real impacts on students to an extent. And why I say to an extent is because let me just say a few words of observation on the implications of these things. The first thing is that contrary to much initial views, the introduction of £9,000 fees in England has not led to a decline in full-time undergraduates from any social group. On the contrary, there have been increased applications. Secondly, the only major cross-border flow is that Scots students have been less likely to study in England. There has been no other reduction. The other change, the Welsh government has been very supportive of their students being funded to study anywhere. What that means, and it's a debate in Wales, is that almost £100 million of Welsh government money goes to English and indeed to Scottish, but mainly to English universities. That is a source of some debate in Wales. In saying all this, we actually don't know what the cost of this is to the state, simply because estimates of the RAB charge move around. And I'm not going to make my estimate of the RAB charge because I think nobody really knows at the moment. But in England, as I have said, there has been an increase in income. And the other thing that we've seen a lot of is an increase and a change in debt. Now look, this is an incredibly complex slide, which I'm not going to spend much time doing. This is from some really interesting work by Lucy Hunter Blackburn. But what it shows in a nutshell, along the x-axis, you've got household income, and up the y-axis is debt. Right at the top is English students studying in Scotland, and then you've got basically English students, so debts, accumulated debts of about 50,000 and plus, and then the big block in the middle is Welsh students or Scots students studying in Scotland. What that's showing is that for a particular groups of students, particularly those from England, or for also, I should note, for Scots students studying in England, they will be leaving university with really major debts. And I think we need to recognize that when we talk about the way in which universities deliver their education. The other point that I just wanted to make was that when we talk about these things at a national level, there is enormous heterogeneity in universities in the proportion of funds which come directly from the state. This is for Scotland, and you can see on the left-hand side, that's the University of the West of England. So the left-hand side is University of St Andrews, on the right-hand side is the University of the West of Scotland, and the difference is enormous, so that when we look at Scotland, which is the average, the dark slide there, and Aberdeen, it's the only thing I've ever seen Aberdeen as the average university. It is a fantastic university, I've got to tell you. But the point being, we need always to recognize the diversity of mission and the extent to which we have diversity in our universities. But this trend that we've seen, this trend in the fee income, and therefore at a time of fiscal austerity, universities having more money, has led to a perception in government that universities are awash with cash. And this word, awash with cash, has been said on many occasions. The slide here shows the surpluses that are available, or that have been made in universities over recent times, the operating surplus and the cost surplus. And it has been common, particularly those between about 2010 and 2012-13, those surpluses to be seen as the universities having too much money. And that's not a great place to be, I would have to say. It's not a great place to be because it's actually entirely wrong. And it's not a great place to be because the universities are, of course, not driving around in gold Rolls Royces and things like that with this surpluses. The fact is that other amounts of money have been taken away, for example, capital, and the fact that universities have continued to be able to invest in capital, which they need to be able to do in order to deliver the partnership with the students that I've talked about earlier, to be able to deliver the facilities, to undertake the research that I've talked about earlier, and to maintain our competitive position as a really strong higher education sector, which the UK needs. The only way we've been able to do that is by making those surpluses. And at the same time, the only reason that they've been able to do it is because having made those surpluses, they can be financially sustainable. Because the one thing that has really happened to universities over the last few years is much greater, if you like, uncertainty in the future student numbers. The cap is off. The cap is off does not mean everybody can go up. It means there's a greater competition for undergraduate students. We know there are challenges increasingly in recruiting international students. We know there are challenges in research funding. So all in all, that kind of, if you like, buffer is absolutely needed. We all know that, but we need to convince our political leaders of that. And we also need to demonstrate that we are an extremely efficient sector as a whole. And that's where I think the work that Universities UK has really driven, I think, incredibly well. And I've been hugely privileged to chair 2 task forces for them. And I think that's where that work has been so incredibly important. And I'm going to spend a little time, if I may, talking about some of the efficiency issues. Initially, just though, to say a couple of things that I've said already, but I think it's important just to remember. And that's firstly, that higher education has been efficient. Those of you who have been around higher education for as long as I have will know that we've always been efficient. We've always searched for savings. Those of you who managed in the 1980s in higher education will remember every year 3%, 2% efficiency gains, and that we were able to manage. It was getting very, very difficult once you've done that for a long period of time, but we did it. What we've not been very good at is telling the world about it. We've absolutely not been good at it because we've tended to say, it's my competitive advantage. I don't think that's right. I think we need to be showing much more partnership. I think we need to be much more upfront and transparent about the efficiencies that we are making and the way, critically, that we, having made those efficiencies, that we are using them to invest in our partnerships with our students and our partnerships with our research colleagues. We've had capital funding down, but we've maintained investment. The tuition fee, let's remember, we talk about the tuition fee, the money went up. But at £9,000, I don't need to tell you that there has been an erosion in real terms of that. The last number I saw, which came from Chris Snowdon, was £8,250 was the real value. That, it seems to me, is a real challenge over time to maintain the kind of excellence that one needs to do. And look, I think it was a tremendous vote of confidence in research that we were able to gain a flat cash settlement for the research councils in 2010, and I think that was a tremendous vote of confidence in the times of fiscal austerity in which we found ourselves. But at the same time, we need to recognise that if that is continued through to 2019, it will be around about a £600 million real decrease in research funding. And that, it seems to me, makes it ever more difficult for us to maintain our position internationally. So that's the problem. And efficiency isn't completely new as a concept. In the spending reviews in 2004 and 2007, we agreed collectively as a sector to £1.23 billion of savings. And the good news is we made them. Measurable savings of that amount. Bill Wakeham, in a magnificent review in 2010, looked at the efficiency of the research base, most notably looking at what you might call the overhead side. And a target of £428 million was made in measurable savings between 2011 and 2015, savings which were exceeded. The sector responded to the challenge and did it incredibly well. And we made a whole series of recommendations in our first report in 2011, recommendations which came around four main areas. In the 2011 report, we picked up four main areas. We picked up procurement, we picked up IT, we picked up shared services, and we picked up streamlining. Let me just say a couple of words about each of those very quickly. By streamlining, what I mean is, look, it happens at Aberdeen sometimes. I know it wouldn't happen at any of your universities whatsoever, but we sometimes find we've got two spreadsheets which are doing similar things, but they don't quite talk to each other. Wouldn't happen at your university. I'll hold my hand up. One of the things that we've been doing is putting together one version of the truth. When you actually do that in a program that we at Aberdeen call OneSource, when you do that, you find that you actually make savings and you improve your effectiveness. And can I just be really, really clear that all the things that we've done with UUK are not just about saving money, it's the scaling the twin peaks of efficiency and effectiveness. It's no use to anyone, certainly no use to the UK, if right across the UK we have universities which are not as good as they were 10 years ago. We've got to scale those twin peaks together. Streamlining, shared services. People talk a lot about shared services. Let me be clear, I do not have a mantra that shared services are the answer to everything. I think there are real opportunities. We at Aberdeen share a data centre with Robert Gordon's University and with our local FE college. That is really effective for all three of us. It saves money and it is more efficient. So therefore, it's a really good thing to do. We share services across sectors. Our sports centre is shared absolutely with the community in a joint venture. Now, those are really good things. What I don't believe is that you should rush out and share services just for the sake of it. You look at the business plan, you look at your strategy. If it works to make the place go better and improve, then do it. If not, don't. With IT, there are enormous opportunities. Again, people put their email into the cloud. There's all sorts of things you can do which save money, and I think we will continue to do that. But the big number comes with collaborative procurement. In Scotland, we do it incredibly. I have to tell you, it's not that I'm going to tell you how wonderful Scotland is throughout this lecture. I'll stop after this. But in Scotland, we have the Advanced Procurement for Universities and Colleges, APUC. It is a brilliant organisation. And the one thing that has been led by Nick Petford, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Northampton, incredibly well over the last few years, has been the development of increased collaborative procurement across England. With the only number that we put in the first report, we put a challenge to get 30% of non-pay spend through collaborative procurement in England. We've achieved that. The savings estimated in the report were £9 billion. It's serious money that you can save if you actually do things well. And then we moved to come back in 2015 with a new report. A new report which started off and said, look, we've delivered. I've said to you already about collaborative procurement. Our pay growth in higher education has been in line with the public and private sectors. In other words, there's not been any, we've shown sense in pay growth. We've made £1.38 billion of savings against the 1.23 that I challenged you with before. Enormous savings in the research councils. And let me say, the research councils are fully part of all this agenda. And I think it's really important to recognise that. The other area that I think is really, really important to show that we've delivered is on the estate. I'll talk a little bit more about the estate in a minute. But AUDE, the Association of University Directors of Estates, have been absolutely brilliant in driving forward change and measuring that change. The only university sectors that we can really compare against properly, Hong Kong, America, Australia, and New Zealand, we are far more efficient than in the use of our estates. And over the last 10 years, we've seen increases in income per square metre of the estate, efficiencies in the estate. And what we've also shown is, and it's a really difficult one around CO2 emissions, because yes, the emissions haven't gone massively down, but actually we're doing that much more research that the interventions that have been made have kept things about flat, and we've saved massively over what would have happened if we had not made those efficiencies. And some of the CO2 interventions that are going on at the University of St Andrews will be carbon neutral by 2019 with a fantastic new invention. In addition, the third area that I think is really important that I'll come back to is asset sharing. I've talked about partnership, and partnership in sharing equipment is unbelievably important. And the gold medal there is up here in the north of England, the N8 group of universities. Just unbelievable what the N8 group have done in promoting asset sharing, because at the end of the day, if we're going to spend money on a piece of equipment, it should be being used all the time. Not only should it be being used all the time, but actually you can get better science. I'll give you an example. At the University of Aberdeen, we could only afford one third-generation genome sequencer. And yet we wanted a genome sequencer for the medical school, we wanted one for the School of Biological Sciences, and we wanted one for the School of Nutrition. So I can imagine it would never happen in your university. Everyone would agree where it was going to be. We had a fair and open conversation about this, and then we decided where to put it. But what has happened is that the PhD students and the scientists working on it have been able to work around each other and interact, so that you end up not only with the sequencer being used more efficiently, but better science happening, better interdisciplinary science happening as a result. It's got to be good news. And over that same time period, let's just remember, going back to the start where I was at the beginning of this talk, student satisfaction's gone up, research performance has gone up. We've got 34 universities in the top 200 in the world. That's just, I mean, it's fantastic, is it not? And we have a real perception internationally as being a leader in innovation. We've moved on from that position a few years ago where we invented things and others developed them. We started to be able to develop them ourselves, and I think that's so important. But we're in a difficult position. The current political context, George Osborne has asked for 25 to 40% cuts in unprotected departments. BIS is an unprotected department. There will then be consequentials for the Scottish and Welsh governments. We absolutely don't know at the moment. We wait for the green paper what is going to happen. We don't know if the cuts will be between 25 and 40%. They may be less. I suspect they won't be more than 40%, but we wait for the green paper, and some of us heard yesterday that it is expected, but we're not quite sure when it is expected. We remain in a situation of uncertainties, and what that means is we need to be as good as we've been for a long time at being agile and responsive to change. And so that's where we came in with our second piece of work. And our second piece of work, what we did was say, well, okay, we'll park procurement, we're doing that, we'll park IT, streamlining, and shared services, and we'll address six other areas. And what we did was, and contrary to public rumour, I don't sit in an office with Jamie Arrowsmith and it was Paul Clark, now Chris Hale, put a cold towel on our heads and write out reports on efficiency. What we did was go out to the community and get the real experts in the community to write a report and then to come back to us And we put a really good process, working with BIS, working with research councils, to get a process of challenge, which has led us, I think, to a really useful piece of work. I'm going to run through each of these very quickly. What we did was say, look, we're going to make a commitment around each of these areas to improve. And the first one is on reward in the higher education workforce. We've been incredibly, I think, mature in the way we have maintained our pay over the last little while in a context when we have to be able to recruit the very best people from across the world in order to maintain our effectiveness. For the sake of any lack of clarity, let me say that my own view with regard to remuneration committees in universities is very clearly that they should involve a student, they should involve a staff member, and they should have minutes published on the web and freely available. Because I believe very much that we should have transparency right across what we do, and that transparency and clarity of our work, I think, is incredibly important around pay. We've been able to deliver reform of our pension schemes in USS, but for some universities, those in the local government pension scheme, it's much harder. And we need to be able to, I think, work with government to have more of an impact on the challenges there. And we need to be able to continue to be innovative in our pedagogy. That means linking with IT, flipped classrooms and things like that. It's incredibly important that we do that because we need to continue to be at the cutting edge globally of education. Secondly, the estate. I've talked about the estate earlier and said how incredibly well we've done, but we can't be complacent. We need to continue to be able to gain more income from the estate, working, I think, much better with our communities, having more communities on campus, being more innovative in the way we teach. One of the things that has happened is a real reduction in the number of postgraduate students. I think we need to be much better in enabling postgraduate taught students to study part-time, to earn while they learn, and then that means much more teaching in twilight hours or as it is in Aberdeen for about 9 months of the year after dark. But we certainly do need, I think, to be really innovative in our use of the estate. And what AUDE have done a great job. And what they've done is bring a whole set of benchmarks so that universities can see how they're doing, how to ask themselves questions about how they could improve their use of the estates. And I think one of the things we will see is increased space use, the sorts of things we're seeing. The S-Lab initiative, which I think is really wonderful, using your really top-class laboratories, but having them available in really flexible ways, I think is what we will see much more of these. And one of the things that we do need to do, that we've been, I think, not very good at necessarily, is share best practice. It doesn't impact on one's competitiveness to actually be able to see how you can improve your estate and how you might do things a little bit better. We need to be willing to share best practice and to be transparent in what we do. And we need to be brilliant. We need to continue to have a sustainable research base. In many ways, this was the one area in which we didn't come out with any magnificent efficiency savings. One of the reasons for that is that we are paying a proportion of full economic costs at the moment. Let's be absolutely frank, we're not paying the full economic costs. And what we say in the report is if you reduce the proportion of full economic costs that you're doing, you're simply cutting. You can't make efficiencies. You can't suddenly say that for 10% less you can do this research project. Universities increasingly are subsidizing research from other income, and that is a decision that would have to be made. But at the end of the day, we don't believe that cutting the percentage of full economic costing is sensible, but we do believe that we need to look hard for efficiencies that come across the research base. So it's not saying can't do anything, but we need to be imaginative and agile and work together. And research councils, I think, are doing a great job to look in a holistic way at the way in which efficiency savings can be made. And one of those is through asset sharing. I've talked enough about asset sharing anyway, but I'll remind you that the gold star does go up here to the N8 group of universities. They did a fantastic job in driving that part of the report. I think there is an increasingly asset sharing registers. Increasingly, we need to have funding for equipment linked to it being shared, not only necessarily between universities or within universities, but also with the private sector. And I see that a lot increasingly in many areas. And of course, the more we share with the private sector, it seems to me, the more likely it is that we will get great research that has translation and innovation, which is what we're trying to achieve. And the last substantive area that is important, and it's great for me as a statistician when I can put data up a lot, is in open data. I'm absolutely clear in my mind that not only do we need partnerships with our students, partnerships with our staff, but we do need to be transparent. We need to use our data in an open way. I'm not completely convinced, I'll be honest. I'm not completely convinced that the massive savings that sometimes are talked about from simply putting procurement data openly can be raised, but who knows? What we have done as part of this work is a really interesting and exciting piece of work looking at how open data can improve the learner journey. That work is just coming to an end. And in a couple of weeks, I think it's on the 17th of November, I'm going to do something I've never done before, and that's speak at a mashup day. So not only do I talk about learner journeys, but I can tell my grandchildren in a few years' time that I spoke at a mashup day. How great is that? But it is incredibly important, I think, that we are embracing open data and trying to use open data just simply to improve the way that we teach and to improve the student experience. And then finally, it is, to me, absolutely critical that we do not lock ourselves away and not tell people about the efficiencies that we've made. That's why we've proposed a template for, in England, the value for money reporting, which is a voluntary thing, to include a real piece on efficiencies. In Scotland, we've agreed to use our outcome agreements, again, to report on efficiencies. What I personally believe we absolutely have to do is to have reports which are very clear, the efficiencies that we've made as a university, the savings that we've made, and what they've been used for, how we have improved the way in which we teach, research, and have an impact on our communities and drive local growth. If we do that, there is then annually something that can be put together and which is a celebration of how every pound that we receive is spent incredibly wisely. I think that's incredibly important that we do that, because I'm really clear. I like this quote. It's a quote we put together. Universities require investment, and in the context of austerity and continued pressures on public spending, must therefore be willing and able to demonstrate what they have done to deliver both excellence and value for money. I think it's incredibly important that we are prepared to do that, and that's our, if you like, our commitment forward. So the messages from this talk this evening: number one, partnership. Everything we do, it seems to me, should be in partnership with our students, with our staff, and critically with each other and other sectors in order to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of what we do. Always scale those twin peaks. Secondly, we need to be deeply transparent in the way that we are using every pound that we spend and demonstrating value for money in everything that we do. And finally, we need to continue to be the brilliant higher education sector that we, right across the nations of the UK, are, and continue to punch well above our weight globally. Thank you very much. I understand I get to do my own questions now, so if anyone would like to ask a question on any subject, except John Taylor is not to ask a question about the performance of Torquay United this season, but on any other subject, I'm prepared to answer a question. And we've got roving mics. Fantastic. Please.
Giles Brown, editor of AUA News Link. You spoke at the beginning a number of times about autonomy,
Yeah.
but that often clashes, I think, with accountability. I wonder if you had something to say on that.
I disagree.
Okay.
Because I take your point, but I think what we mean by autonomy is the ability to be agile, the ability to make decisions, the ability to say, look, you know, we've got a really good team here. We want to focus our teaching in one particular area and invest in something. That's autonomy. Now, autonomy doesn't mean that you do not account for what you do. And in the University of Scotland, we've got something called responsible autonomy, which is saying we should be accountable. Regardless of where you sit on that proportion of public money, you are still receiving a very, very large amount of public money, and you, it seems to me, ought to be prepared to account to the public on why and how you've spent it. That doesn't impact on your autonomy. Your autonomy is the ability to take decisions, to use that money in different ways, and then to be accountable for it. So, and I really, the one thing that I'm really clear of is that really successful higher education systems are characterized by the autonomy of their institutions, and that is something that we really need to stick with. Please.
Thank you. I'm from the University of St Andrews, and I just wanted to ask, as a principal of a Scottish university, what are your views on the current governance issues around Scottish universities and the Scottish Executive's proposals?
Well, if I were to say pretty simply that 18 principals all think the same thing, and that is that in the main, the proposed higher education governance bill is basically doing nothing to really change or impact on universities. So I think, yes, I think there should be more students, at least 2 students on court. There are at the University of Aberdeen. I don't think you need to legislate on that. Where I get worried about the higher education governance bill in Scotland is I don't understand how elected chairs are going to work, and I have not seen a way in which anyone persuades me that you can have elected chairs alongside a rector, for example, as you have at the University of St Andrews and we have at the University of Aberdeen. And I'm really clear that some of the statements risk the ONS classification of universities as non-public bodies. They become public bodies. As soon as that happens, that impacts on our charitable status and impacts on the amount of money that we have in universities. So I'm very worried about it. The one thing I do see at the moment is that there has been, I think, a willingness to have a conversation, and I very much hope that sense at the end of the day. And of course, I have to say, sense being the sorts of things that I've just talked about, but I do think it should be possible for sensible people to come to a position where everybody can move forward without there being the kinds of discussions that we've been having in Scotland over the last little while. Sir.
Hi, Chris Innes from SOAS, University of London. I'd agree with you that we do lots of good things in the sector and institutions around economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And one thing I'd perhaps challenge or ask a question on is around agility. And certainly my perception, and I know that of lay, external members of court, council, whatever you want to call it, from places I've worked or spoke to others, is that we're not very fast and that they view us as ponderous or even glacially slow at times in doing things and making decisions. And it may be different in the utopia of the far northeast, but I just wondered if you could say a little bit about how we do all these good things but faster, particularly in a rapidly changing environment.
Look, I'm not going to claim universities are the most agile institutions. I am saying that they have become increasingly agile, and I am saying that people have really been prepared to seek to change faster. Having said that, there's an enormous amount that we need to continue to do. But we are, and rightly in my view, communities. And that's why I do passionately believe, for example, in senates. I passionately believe in consultation, and that slows us down compared with a private company. And I accept those kinds of situations, but that doesn't slow you down that things can't happen and you can't innovate and change if you really want to. So yes, probably slower than some places. We've got to get better, but I think we're on a real upward trajectory. But we must always remember autonomy, but always, I'm really passionate that we maintain ourselves as a community, and a community which cares about each other, and that regardless of what you do for the institution. Without that community, we're not a university.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. My name's David Law. I'm the editor of the AUA's journal Perspectives. I'd like to ask you about sustainability, because the emphasis on efficiency and driving costs down ultimately is, at least has the potential of compromising quality and excellence. I took from your talk that the driver behind efficiency is partly around public accountability and concern that it is a good thing to be efficient. There is also, of course, the question for the government about the role of the market in this. But my concern really about England in particular going forward in the next 5 or 10 years is on the sustainability of the student loan system and whether the kind of resources coming into higher education in England are going to be protected when the economy achieves a different kind of situation, and in particular when interest rates go up.
I think that's a very, very good question. I hope you won't feel that I've let you down if I say I really don't know the answer to that. It's a really big challenge at what the long-term sustainability of the student loan system is. I think we know, though, and one thing I do think is incredibly important always to remember is that I believe there's no such thing as a higher education budget. We've got a national budget, and politicians do very difficult jobs and have to make decisions on how to allocate funds around that. And politicians will, in the situation that you take, have to make some difficult decisions about the sustainability of that particular model. And I know that it's going to be some challenging decisions to take. It's as simple as that. And I really don't know the answer. Sir.
Philip Evans, I'm the University Governance Officer here at the University of York. I was just wondering if you had any views on how institutions might actively involve students in this particular agenda, perhaps under your heading of, you mentioned partnerships and learner journey, but when it comes to efficiency savings and savings money, I think probably most students would be keener to see institutions splash the cash, particularly on them. I think,
well, clearly they would, but I think, I take a pretty strong view that the students that we work with are absolutely, they've all got brains the size of small planets. They all understand budgets increasingly, and what they want to see is value for money. And if you sit down with them and explain how can we make this work in the same way, but do it for less money, or how can we make things go better but do it in a more streamlined way. My experience is the students are particularly happy to have that conversation. What we've got to do, though, and all the things that I've talked about tonight, are not about, if you like, pulling back. It's about doing things better. And I think in many ways, some of the things that we've done, and I've given examples of where I think we've got about as far as we can go, but there are ways to become more efficient, which can also improve effectiveness. There's some fantastic things going on at the moment in UCAS, which I think will make UCAS even better as an organisation, but more efficient, and therefore be able at least to maintain their fees without them going up. And I think that's where we've got to just recognise we're in a flat cash world, and we're likely to be for the next few years, but that doesn't mean to say we can't continue to deliver properly. And I think our students will work in partnership with us in a really exciting way. And that's actually my experience. Now, if I said, shall we have one last question, that normally kills any discussion, doesn't it? So, shall we have one last question?
I'd like to ask you, if I may, what is the most challenging issue for UK higher education at the moment? What would you focus on as the key thing which has got to be solved in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that the key thing we've got to solve is almost the one that you described. We've got to have a sustainable system which is enabling students to benefit from higher education, to improve the, I don't like the word offer, but to improve the offer that we are giving them, and to acknowledge that the pedagogy is going to change very quickly. I simply don't accept, for example, that people are going to do their higher education in their bedrooms using MOOCs and online education. I'm completely convinced there will continue to be campus universities, but we are only going to continue to succeed as campus-based universities if we really seize the opportunities, particularly the technology, but not just technology, gives us to change and improve the pedagogy, which will make us ever more attractive to our students and to students from all over the world who wish to study. That's the first point. And the second thing that I worry about a lot, which I think is really, really important, is actually nothing to do directly with universities, and that's our position within the European Union. I'm really, really clear in my mind that one of the biggest risks that I've got on my kind of personal risk register that I worry about is the UK leaving the European Union, because I think that would be significantly damaging to UK higher education in all sorts of ways. So I'm not going to be neutral. Thanks very much.
Right, I think it's incumbent upon us to thank Professor Sir Ian Diamond in our usual way before I say some thanks to some other people. So thank you very much.